everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the USC Comedy Festival, Volume 5. I'm Alex Zago, Director of Programming at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our dedicated USC Comedy faculty and staff, as well as USC Visions and Voices, the Arts and Humanities initiative that has generously sponsored all 5 editions of the festival. I'd also really like to thank Netflix for coordinating today's panel. Please visit the festival website to learn about our other upcoming events this weekend, including tonight's spotlight on FX's What We Do in the Shadows, and a full day of Hulu original comedy tomorrow, featuring panels with A.D. Bryant, Rami Youssef, Patton Oswalt, Keith Knight, and many others. If you'd like to ask a question today, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. We also have a Comedy Festival Discord server running this weekend, which you can join at any time, and we'll post that in the chat. Today's spotlight on Netflix's Big Mouth, featuring co-creators and executive producers Andrew Goldberg, Mark Levin, and Jennifer Flackett, and co-executive producer Kelly Galuska, will be moderated by SCA Professor J.D. Connor from our Division of Cinema and Media Studies. Before we start the panel, we're also going to look at an episode. We're going to screen the first episode from season 4 of Big Mouth, offered courtesy of Netflix. So enjoy the show, and please now welcome Professor Jack Epps Jr. from the John Wells Division of Writing for Screen and Television and the Jack Oakey Endowed Chair in Comedy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Vision Voices Comedy Festival Volume 5 and our special panel tonight, Spotlight on Netflix Big Mouth. I am Jack Epps Jr., and I am a holder of the Endowed Chair in Comedy. I'm also co-director of USC Comedy, along with my colleagues Barnett Kelman and David Isaacs. USC Comedy is a program offering comedy classes in the divisions of writing, production, and media studies, where you can play in the comedic sandbox and help develop your voice. So be sure to check out our courses for fall semester on the USC Comedy website. And we also offer a comedy minor. I want to take a moment to thank the School of Cinematic Arts Dean Elizabeth Daly for her continued support for USC Comedy. And a special huge thank you to Alex Zago, Director of Programming and Special Projects at the School of Cinematic Arts, for producing this amazing weekend, as well as the rest of the USC Comedy team that's worked to make this festival happen. J.D. Connor, which we'll meet tonight, Justin Wilson, Wayne Fetterman, and Oakey Fellow Brian DeAngelis and his team of student volunteers. So let's first enjoy an episode of Big Mouth.
I hope everybody comes back. I'm J.D. Connor. I'm a professor in the Division of Cinema and Media Studies, and we should very shortly have all of our guests with us. In at least my top window, I've got Mark Levin and Jennifer Flackett. Hello. And in my bottom window, I've got Kelly Galuska, and here is Andrew Goldberg.
Hello.
Yes, a four-headed monster brought to us courtesy of Netflix, and so I really want to thank you all for coming. I could give a little background, but actually, because we have really only an hour together, I figure people can do their IMDb searching on their own if there are gaps that are left after we've spoken. I also thought that I might be leading into the screening of the episode, and I wanted to let people know that there was going to be kind of a, that this was going to be certainly the most adult content we were going to have this weekend. It's been very
What else are you screening?
It's been very well, not much, but almost all the other panels are like, can we swear? Well, I'm going to go ahead and swear anyway. And like we fire this up and like, anyway. My dean is likely somewhere going to be in this, and I'm like, am I going to have to say like the words like cum bender and big dick boy?
Well, you don't have to, but
you just did.
Yeah, well, those are in quotes, right? So anyway, these are 4 of the folks who produced this Annie and Emmy and GLAAD nominated series that's now the first 4 seasons have been unleashed upon us and the rest of the world. My understanding is that there are 2 more seasons in the Netflix commitment. And I guess the content warning for you all is that this semester I'm teaching a Netflix class, So some of my questions may head toward the Netflixy side a little bit. Usually in these panels, people want to start by asking things like, so what have you learned over the course of the 4 seasons? But I want to ask the exact opposite questions. Looking back, what do you say to yourselves? You know what? We were total professionals and we had this right from the beginning. We didn't need to learn this. We're good. Let's start with that. Like, what did you totally get right from the beginning that you're proud you've gotten right over the course of those 4 seasons?
Wow. Can I just say, and this is sincerity, not flattering my friend and partner, but I getting Andrew Goldberg to do it with us, because he is an animation expert, and everything we know about animation, we learned from Andrew.
And
you know,
is our inspiration for Andrew.
and then
So on every level, we got
I
that.
thought you were going to say that this would be very hard for me because I'm usually focused on what we don't have right yet.
well, that's
That's
true for
true.
Andrew too. Yeah.
The idea of throwing that to you. Okay, Andrew,
Yeah.
go. What are you grateful for?
Yeah.
I think one thing we got right from the start was doing a show about puberty that's super honest, because we hadn't seen that before. And like, there were a couple moments that I think back to in the first season where I kind of realized that. The first was when we watched the animatic of the first episode, which is the rough animation of the first episode, and Andrew's sitting there jacking off next to his sleeping best friend, and he's got this woolly creature stroking his head and encouraging him and being like, well, I've never seen anything like this on TV before.
You're
So
like, finally my
Yes.
story is being told.
yeah, finally my story.
As it
Right.
literally was.
And Venus is playing basketball.
Venus is playing basketball.
Venus is playing basketball.
We knew
The
we
other
weren't-
thing, the other thing that I always remember was John Mulaney was in the writer's room with us one of the first weeks and asked the question who the show was for, because it's about kids, but it's way too dirty for children to watch. And I remember panicking and thinking, oh my God, we've made a show for nobody. But that I think we got right, that we just made a show that we wanted to see and that we would like is, I think probably how some of the best shows are made, and that's really how our show came to
And
be.
then we found those things that, like, things we wanted answers to and things we hadn't
Mhm.
seen. I think back to Kelly's first script, which was about
Yes.
Jessie getting her period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And-
second episode of the show, right?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
like the bloody underwear. And I know for girls, like that, all that stuff is very under wraps and you never see it. You might even hear about it. You might read a book about it, but you don't see it as entertainment. And I know, and Goldie or Andrew, as others know, when we screened it, like the sound that all the women artists and the women writers and all just the women in the room all were like, oh, I've seen this thing, I've seen this representation. So I think that we really got right too, of just really doing kind of boys and girls and then boys and girls together.
That's great, because obviously from the beginning, one could imagine this show was pitched as Mulaney and Kroll, they're at Twosome, they did the IFC stuff, but in fact, it's immediately boys and girls. And then also, I don't know how quickly it happens, but really fast. It's a whole bunch of different sexual identities and gender identities. And there's a kind of mix master approach. How quickly did you know it was going to be everything in the pot like that?
Well, it's evolved, and it's continuing to grow in terms of all the stories and points of view that we're able to encompass in the show. The third episode was called "Am I Gay?" Which was about the Mulaney character questioning his sexuality, and now in the fourth season we're getting to explore gender identity, which for us is something that we felt like we were ready to do, and we needed to do, and also we're just trying to listen to what's happening with our kids and what's happening with young people today, and being honest to the things that are relevant to them.
Well, because the other part, the antithesis of your question is we've learned a lot. Like
That was where I was going to
We
head
ourselves
eventually.
as writers and
Yeah.
as producers, we have learned a lot. And I really feel like, wow, I know a lot more than when I started.
Yeah, and the way that I talk to my kids about sex is, I mean, and they're 8 and 10, so we're just getting going. But like the way that I speak to them, I never would have gone to on my own without doing this show. Like
Sure.
the other day, like they were grossed out by seeing kissing in a movie, and my wife and I were like full on Elliot and Diane Birch, like sex can be very rewarding and enjoyable if you bring integrity to the process.
That's great.
Like your mother and I do it all the time.
They don't need to know that.
This is why kids don't want to
Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah.
So there's that wanting to get it right, like that in some ways there's a, I don't want to call it like a children's television workshop approach, but like that part of it. But then there's the like determination to stay incredibly just silly at times. And I was thinking of Kelly's episode 2 in this 4th season, when the pads, for those of you who haven't seen it, Jesse's pads, when she goes swimming in the lake, she doesn't wear a tampon, and so her pads just keep swelling and the entire lake is sucked up into her pads. That's not accurate. And that's not what actually happens.
But it feels that way. But
Right.
it feels like that,
Yeah, that was based on an actual experience of mine. The lake did not get sucked up into the pad, but I did not know how to wear a tampon, and I did wear a pad in a lake, and it did float up out of my bathing suit. And so, yes, it's exactly that. It's like going into the deepest horror version of that, which is sucking up the lake and a plane.
And the plane, yeah.
Which was very fun.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that is interesting about the show, because as you were saying, it's a show that you wanted to watch, but like when you take the educational side responsibly, then you're kind of imagining that like maybe the cool parents or the kids who don't have like parental restrictions on their Netflix are watching it anyway. And then, what comes of that? So like, I guess this is a Netflix question. Do you know whether your audience has like sort of 2 tranches, like people with kids and then people who aren't?
That isn't how, I mean, it isn't how Netflix, just so you know, as a Netflix scholar, right? That isn't how we, or at least that's not how Netflix presents our viewers to us, right? They'll tell you about the things that they're interested in. What are the stories? But they never separate them out by kind of identity for us, but you'll see what people are talking about.
And because it's a family account and shared account, you don't exactly know in terms of that regard, but anecdotally, talking to kids and then also to parents who may or may not know everything, but do know kind of what people watched on Netflix, ironically, that's kind of pretty available. It seems to be kids who are going through it and older. Like, so, and that's basically what we tell people, it's people who are experiencing these things for the first time or of the age of these characters, which is around 13. That's it seems to be then, and then from there, the college audience and the young 20s and the up to 30 years old, I think it's very.
But I think parents really like it as something we'll often hear. My kids watched it by themselves, and we watched it separately, and then we can talk about it. But we don't want to watch it together.
That's right. No, one vividly remembers, I think, sometime when a parent would have rented an R-rated DVD or something, and you're sitting in the living room together, and you're like, we should all not be here right now. Like, I want to watch this on my own. And you all clearly want to watch this.
Go to the bathroom for a long time right now.
I watched an episode with my parents, and that was a big mistake.
Oh.
I should not have done that. Yeah.
You cannot do that.
No.
So just to keep going a little bit on what you've learned, one of the things that was an interesting shift that happened over the course of this 4th season is that Jenny Slate is sort of replaced by, and it's narrativized by Io Adebri. That clearly is, I mean, on the one hand, it feels like something that gets learned like almost in that episode when the Missy character goes to Atlanta to find out more about her Black roots and the rest of her family, her dad's sister and her cousins. Is that how that worked? Can you talk us through that casting change and how that story evolved.
Well, it's very complex actually, because over the course of several seasons, Missy, who's a mixed race character, has been growing, and a lot of it being led by the Black writers in our staff, into a deeper exploration of her Black identity and her experience. And through the course of these stories, Jenny Slate always had questions and some hesitancy about, even though it is a mixed race character, whether it's appropriate to represent a character who is a Black person who represents the world as Black and identifies that way. And by the end of the fourth season, which we were finishing right around the time of George Floyd last year, at that time, she realized, and in really honest conversations with us, and we all agreed that it was the appropriate time to make the change. And we had already been deep into exploring that Missy's journey, and her own awakening to her Black identity, and then also her struggle with self. And in the ninth episode of the fourth season, she is in a funhouse and she sees all different versions of herself, and they shatter, and she puts together a mosaic, and that mosaic Missy comes to life, and that's the moment at which we trade off from Jenny Slate's voice to Io's voice. And but it was a combination of events that led to a moment. We were already exploring it, but we did, with making the decision to change the casting, discover this is the perfect moment to do that handoff, and it worked within the larger story we were telling.
And with Io, it was really an interesting process too, because she was a writer on the show before she was Missy, and we auditioned a ton of actors to play Missy, people that we found on Twitter, people that we went just through the traditional casting process. People were like, they're like, you should read our friend, and we read a bunch of different people. We got self-tapes, and we had a bunch of people read with Nick, and ultimately it was like, Io felt right, and maybe she had a leg up because she was in the writer's room and had been part of all these discussions that we had about how Missy was going to evolve. But I think it also just has a lot to do with who she is as a person, as a writer, because I think that I'd always identified with Missy growing up, and there's something about Missy that you can't fake. Like, if you don't have that sort of sincerity and nervousness, it's very hard to portray.
Yeah, we had Rachel Sennett, her partner in the previous panel.
Yeah.
And their dynamic in the Io and Rachel are single sketches is one where you're like, oh, I see how Io could become Missy out of that. And, of course, you would never make Rachel Missy.
Yes, and that's true. And but Io has so many things in common with the character that made it a really perfect fit.
Cool. So that takes us to a set of questions I wanted to ask about, like, the arc of the show. One thing about getting the 3-season commitment at the end of the third season, at the end of the sort of like, the proverbial Netflix death at the end of the third season, means that you had the chance to think ahead and really plan things out. So the last couple of, the end of the last episode of the fourth season can talk about what's happening in the fifth. But at the same time, you're making changes even in the writing room, of course, over the course of the summer. Can you talk a little bit about then what it means to plan, like, through the Bible or whatever, I guess, over 3 seasons worth of arc, but also like keep it lively and fresh so that season 5 isn't like a donut season that's just like on the way?
Andrew?
I don't know.
I think that's probably an Andrew question.
I think like, and on a bigger level, the truth is we don't plan that far ahead. We kind of write ourselves into quarters and then write our way out in the back half of the season is kind of how it goes. I think we like to come into the season with a theme. And sometimes that means a new creature. Sometimes it's a more subtle theme. But that's, I think we often come into the season with the theme, and then about a third of the way through, we figure out what the last episode's going to be, and then we start filling in the middle. Does that sound right? How we do it?
But I also think like each season is its own thing. We
Yeah.
did not think of it as like, oh, we're telling this kind of tale because we're telling school, right?
Yeah.
Our very rare in animation, our characters are aging very, very slowly. So things that happened before, they exist. You know, it's not each kind of shows its own kind of time period. So, but we don't really think of it that way. We really just think like, what are we doing in this kind of, in a way, this 3-month period of the kids'
Right.
lives?
And then like season 4 is a great example of like, you plan ahead. Like we decided we wanted to do anxiety as our theme because we knew it was going to come out around the presidential election and that everybody would be losing their shit and freaking out. We didn't know that there would be a pandemic. Like, you know, so it's like you plan but we knew anxiety would probably be the emotion of the year. We didn't know how right we'd be.
Another thing we got right. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit then about workflow and how that changed with the pandemic? You know, this may be an older topic now that it feels like we're coming out of it, but
yeah,
you know, one of the things that was clear on campus was that the animation workflow, while it became dispersed and remote, was less interrupted than, you know, live action on set shooting. But if you're in a constrained world where you've only got, you know, X number of months to write and get the stuff to animatics, maybe it really was disrupted. So what was it like?
God, it was fascinating because I mean, it was like having to rebuild a car while you're driving it, you know, which was a very unique experience because we did not stop from the day that you know, around March 12th of last year to March 13th and then beyond. We just were one day in the office, the next day not, and we still had our table read the following Tuesday. Only now it was over Zoom, this technology that we had only discovered a few days earlier. And we figured out, well, how do you do Zoom table reads? You know, how do you do Zoom writers' rooms, editing rooms? Records were the hardest thing to sustain. And there was the narrative that animation keeps going, which was very exciting for us, but it was also like a, you know, prophecy that we had to fulfill. Because animation keeps going, even though it seems impossible. So we had
well,
a
we
little.
knew how lucky we were too. I mean, even in the midst of it, we were like, we must keep going because we're so lucky that we can keep going. And it so happened that Mark and I had dinner with a Simpsons writer.
The last meal before quarantine, really.
Yeah. And he was talking about it. They think they're going to a Zoom room. And Mark was like, oh, like, all right. And so Mark was talking, remember Goldie and Kelly? He was like talking about Zoom rooms. Yeah. And we were like, I guess so. All right. And then the next thing you knew, he was like,
well, yeah. I remember one day we were like, it was a few days before we left. One of the assistants on the show, he didn't want a birthday cake for his birthday. He wanted a big charcuterie plate. So we had this big plate of meat and cheeses in our kitchen, and we were all standing around and eating over it. And then a couple of days later, we were
that
like,
was on Tuesday.
That was Tuesday.
On Wednesday, we put in the rule: no more charcuterie plates.
Yeah, no more eating off the
go home, everybody.
That's really how it went.
It was a fast-moving situation. Yeah. But the workflow, the challenge, honestly, of you know, we found that being able to have our Zoom writers' room was challenging, and there's some things that are better and some things well, nothing's better, but there's some things that are we can work with and some things are not as good. And we can talk even more about that, Andrew. I was going to jump just for a second to the record process, which was really challenging to figure out how, with all of our actors, to recreate the process of recording their voices in a broadcastable way, you know, in a way that works. In their closets, and with them being the engineers, and we that for the whole spring into summer last year was kind of the holy grail for all of us to figure out a way to do that. And we just recorded Zoom conversations like this, and used that audio for scratch audio for 4, 5, 6 episodes right as we entered the quarantine. And only now are we finally getting out of that kind of
that
whole that was created by that experience. Andrew, do you want to talk, or Kelly, about the writer's room experience?
I mean, as a writer in the room, it was a fascinating change, very difficult, and I felt for Andrew in all of it, because I remember our very first day on Zoom. There were probably 12 or 14 boxes on our computers, and for the first 3 hours, everyone was just playing on Zoom and like changing their name and changing their background. And we're like, this won't last for very long. And Andrew was like, we have to work, and did such an excellent job of gathering everyone. But it was really, the beginning was the Zoom exhaustion. That's something we learned very quickly, is that the room could not be the same length on Zoom as it was in real life. It just simply was not possible to hold people's attention and eyes open for that long. So there were some changes, I'm sure Andrew can talk about, that were made because of that. But
maybe in the long run, like maybe we don't need as many hours. I mean, I do think that there's all sorts of things that you can sort of take from it too. Like I do think that working in a new way enables you to look at it in a very different way, which you never really do. So I think that there'll be some good lessons to learn from it as well.
I agree.
I hope so. I mean, to me, I think, being a comedy writer is really fun. You sit in a room with other people and make each other laugh, which creates a lot of droplets. But it's really, I mean, like, that's one of the reasons I became a TV writer, is I like being with other people. I like sitting in a room with people and making each other laugh. And that's I think what you missed the most. There's not that we don't make each other laugh, but it's just not the same. You guys know that. You've been doing this, online. You've been doing school online for a year. It's not quite the same. So it'll be fun when we get back. And in some ways, it'll be a lot easier. But I don't know. I started during season 1 of Human Resources, I started dancing in the morning to try to get the energy going.
Which I appreciated.
That was one of the questions I wanted to ask. Was Human Resources, as I understood it, was sort of planned to sort of slot into the gaps, right? Like as a kind of, almost as like a Lego piece. Did that get messed up because your timing, or no? Everything was still on target.
We had a date that was planned to start. It's kind of wild.
It is. Yeah. And the four of us and Nick created Human Resources together. Kelly's the showrunner of Human Resources. And it was amazing. And it was just determination. And we realized, you know what, we're not going anywhere. And we may as well get to work and make another show. So we had always, before the quarantine, shot for mid-July of last year, and we started the same day we always intended to. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, in some ways HR was also like a little easier, because we had switched to remote in the middle of working on season 5 of Big Mouth, and started to figure out what we were doing by the time we got to HR in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the rest of the pipeline, like, that is to say, after the writer's room basically wraps, that was all consistent. Like, you didn't have to.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the really nice things about doing the 2 shows is, with 10 episodes of Big Mouth, often people on our crew would go on hiatus after they finished 10, and they might take a job that took them off schedule with us. This way, we're able to create more of a year-round job for our artists and our production people, so that they can move from one show to the next and back and forth.
Did you, speaking of being off schedule, one of the things that's happened to us, because so many of our students have been, in effect, like, marooned around the globe, right? There was one of the great things about a writer's room is that, like, everybody's sort of on that clock, whatever that clock is. Do you end up with people time zone shifted?
Yeah. We have some East Coast people.
We've been, different people have at different times gone different places. It's been kind of this freeing thing. And it's also,
we also hired people who didn't live in LA, which we probably wouldn't have done before.
Exactly. We cast a wider geographic net because of it.
Although we've often had people like from New York who just for our first seasons, just moved. Because there was no virtual room. So we've always opened it up to other areas when we're looking for writers.
Yeah, but like we have an editor who lives in Brooklyn, and
Yeah.
she just works on our
Yeah.
Yeah.
on our schedule. We have a few writers on Big Mouth now who aren't in LA.
And will there be a grand gathering of the tribe then when you come back?
Some version of it, probably.
I don't know.
You know, we'll see. You know, I think we're trying
I
to
wouldn't
figure
want to
out.
be the one writer on the screen. I
No,
would feel
No.
so left out.
me either.
We're all, I think, not only us, but you know, every television show, but every work environment is going to figure out what hybrid means and what, you know, safe return to, or the way we, you know, the new normal is. So we're going to sort that out. We're, you know, as of today, we're still in the Zoom room, obviously, but you know, hopefully later this year we'll get a chance to figure it out.
Yeah. So I want to ask some sort of like fourth season kinds of questions.
Yeah.
One of those is, by this point, you all have now a big roster of characters. Since we watched the opening montage number for season 4, it's like, hey, remember all these folks. When Bill Hader was here earlier today and talking about things that he learned on South Park and writing at Pixar, he was saying the thing that I learned probably most was that everybody needs a reason to live. And so if you're on a South Park, you know, episode and you're like, why is this character here? Do they need to be here? If not, you know, you save the time, the animation, the whatever by just not having them around.
Yeah.
Yep.
At the same time, you know, there's a little bit of fan service, right? Like everybody's got their, like, you know, person, like, you know, I want to see Jay's brothers come back and like beat the shit out of him, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
A lot of people want to see more of Jay's brothers.
I think especially Val, or at least there's some woman on the internet who really likes Val.
There's a couple women in the writer's room who really like
Yeah. I mean, I live in Pasadena, right? So like it's Little Armenia, right? Like that's where so I'm used to. So my question is, by the time you get to the 4th season, you've got a huge roster of characters, and you need to handle them, but also like you got to give them a reason to live. So can you talk through just some of that internal writing problem of like, how do you manage a big cast when it's like that?
Well, I mean, we want to obviously get the points of view and that the characters bring with them into the story. So we let the story guide us as much as possible. And there are characters who are, you know, an important part of the ensemble, whether even though they're not in that much. I think of Gina Rodriguez's character, who was very significant in the 2nd season, is still part of the student body. And when we're doing stories that reach, you know, that are more about a wider group of kids, then we draw from the people we've already created. We're also getting a real collection of monsters that come through it, especially as we expand our themes. We have Depression Kitty. I mean, Jesse alone walks around with a mosquito and a kitty and a shame wizard, a hormone monster.
It's a real menagerie.
But you know, it speaks to the complexity of the kids' experience and just our widening world. You know, Andrew, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a real high class problem. I mean, really, just that we have a lot of interesting characters and great actors who play them. Like, I think of like a lot of people after season 4 were like, more Judd, we want more Judd. And there happens to be more Judd in season 5, which we wrote before everybody got mad about no Judd in season 4. So there's Judd coming, but it is, you know, there's so many minutes in 10 episodes to bring in all our people, and you know, and ultimately there are the core kids and monsters in the show, and we're really telling their stories, and it's figuring out ways where these other characters really intersect with our main characters.
So also on the character front, some of these characters like go way back in certain ways to like Nick's stand-up. And I wanted to ask a little bit about Coach Steve, because when Coach Steve is Ref Jeff, for those who didn't watch Kroll Show, Coach Steve and Ref Jeff are basically, it's the same voice, it's the same sticking his ass out, it's the same whistle obsession.
Yeah.
But Coach Steve is so dumb. Like, at what point did like the character like can you talk about like the evolution of that? Like, you know, I've got this on the shelf, but he's got to get really dumb.
It feels like he loses intellect every season too.
I mean,
It's like
even in season 1, I mean, I remember a writer in the room being like, so
Oh, yeah.
he's just gonna be dumb and like shit himself and stuff. And you guys were like, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that writer wasn't happy about it, but we were like,
He was
yeah,
so
no, that
upset,
seems
yeah.
to be the direction. Yes.
So he
no,
devolved
Nick, I
quickly.
remember Nick was like, yes. He's
Yeah.
like, yes, I'm him, and that's who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
He's the most
But he's
cartoony.
very inspired by someone you grew up with too.
Yes,
So, like-
we had a coach, Steve.
Yes.
But he was not the stupidest person in the world. But Coach Steve, I think, like, to me, like, Coach Steve, I think we have so much affection for him because I think as writers, we all wish we were a little stupider and a little happier. And that's the thing about Coach Steve. He's like the dumbest character on TV, but I think he's also one of the happiest characters on
But-
TV.
and also he just wants to hang. Like
Yeah,
he
Yeah.
just
he just
wants
needs
to
human
hang with
contact.
people. That's
Yeah.
all he
Yeah.
wants, you know, and there's
Yeah.
something so lovely
Sweet
about that.
quality.
Yes.
Yeah, I always like he's one of my favorite characters, as is Jay, as is Lola. And to me, one of the things that I love about all three of those characters is they just want love and they just want people to pay attention to them. And it's, to me, there's something very human about that.
He's also at the root of one of the great, like, you know, one of the great crossover events in Netflix history
That was so fun.
with the Queer Eye guys. I want to say that, like, to me, the Queer Eye guys' arrival felt almost like a new Scooby-Doo Adventures
Yes.
moment, where it's going to be like, and here are the Sex Pistols with the Mystery Machine Gang.
Right.
Can you talk through a little bit about that? I promised myself this wasn't going to be an hour on Disclosure, the musical, the movie, but like
Oh, God.
we're going to do 10 minutes on Disclosure, the musical.
Great
the movie.
episode, top to bottom, everything about it. But that came about, you know, we loved Queer Eye, and we went to a Netflix event, some kind of Netflix event, and there they were. We saw them, and we were just such fans,
And they were such fans.
and they were such fans. We had heard, I think, they were fans, and we kind of went up and talked to them, and they were just so enthusiastic, and it immediately occurred to us right there, like, you guys, we have to figure out a way to do something to have you on the show. We weren't really looking for it until that moment. Then when it occurred to us, then we said, oh, it must happen. And Coach Steve seemed like the natural person to get it.
He was the only person.
Yeah.
He's the one who needed it most.
Yeah. And it was just, they could not have been more delightful. I have to say. when
They were
came
so much
in.
fun.
They were
Yeah.
so much fun.
And Jonathan and Karamo do Connie and Maury's voices, and like improv.
so
that made
dirty.
me
It was too
watch.
dirty.
It was so
Too
dirty.
dirty.
Too dirty. That is not safe for
Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was,
So-
no,
No, it was fun.
It was bad.
It was
Okay, so
fun. It was really like, wow.
That raises the question that, like, you knew I was going to get to, which is just how dirty is too dirty for Netflix? Because, for example, in the shower scenes at summer camp, there are multiple teenage boys helicoptering their dicks and like talking about it, and obviously anything that would be photoreal like that would be utterly impossible.
Sure.
So,
Right.
of course,
Yes.
but you all can do that sort of all the time. Are there moments when you get like where you ran up against a wall where you're like, or is the wall something that you can sense yourselves? Like,
Well, we try to be honest and funny, obviously, in the room, and you know, we've bumped up against the wall a few times, but you know, we're given a lot of freedom by Netflix and by the way in which streaming television, you know, tells stories and the relationship with the audience. So we have been very lucky to be able to just do stuff that feels honest and funny. There are a few things, you know, that I was surprised that maybe we were questioned, like, this isn't the best thing, I think. And I was surprised by some things that weren't questioned. I thought, like, when I saw, like, wait a minute, this thing about Garrison Keillor having his skull fuck on like in the
I
seventh
thought you were
episode.
gonna say intercourse.
Intercourse, skull intercourse.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so they're
Oh,
gonna say
so
anything?
that
We're gonna
was
just be allowed
that
to.
was really the line.
Yeah.
Like I was like, okay.
That's as close to the line.
And we tried let me tell you, the room tried to go farther.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, sure.
We found Jen's line there.
I found
Yeah,
my
Jen
line.
said,
I found my line where they wanted to do something else with Garrison Keillor's head. And I was like, no, we can't do that. But then every time I went to the bathroom, they'd be like, let's put it in on Jen's gone. So like we find our little things, and there'll be moments where Netflix will say, please take a look at this. But we really are, the great thing with Netflix is we really are making the same show together. And so, we really, I feel like we really always find a good solution if they have any issues with anything.
And that's part of the process too of just making the show.
Yeah.
There's so many different points. There's when we're writing the script, and then when we do the table read, and then when we see the storyboards and the animatic, there's a lot of opportunities to watch it in a group. And that's one of the things that is, we try to recreate that over Zoom, and you miss that in person because especially those are the kind of things where when you're watching a color cut in a room of 30 people and there's something that's just gross and not funny, it instantly.
Yeah.
Like you just feel it in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're losing us. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not even like you're losing the audience. We lose ourselves, and we're like, oh, that's not good. We can't stomach it. Then
Yeah, what have we
definitely
done?
let's take it out.
Yeah.
And you have the freedom to walk it back sort of all the way through the process. That is like, it's one thing to say like, to the writer's assistant, take that part out. But like when you're looking at a rendered version,
Well,
you can
it's the
still do it.
great thing about animation, because Mark and I really came from live action. And the great thing almost immediately that I learned about animation was like, oh, you have all these points in the process. First, you have your radio play. If it doesn't work there, you're just recording voices. There's never like, I got to get the trucks back.
It's the best
I've got to
time,
like get
actually,
the
to-
lighting right. There's none of that. So at every point, if there's really a problem, you can fix it. Sometimes your artists are, a little upset and wish that you had gotten it right earlier. But we really try to get it right the first time. That's a big part. That was something we learned from Andrew, which he was like, we need good radio plays. Because if we have those, we're set.
We solve so much. We try to solve as much as possible before any artist has to draw, and that is the easiest time to catch those things.
It allows us to do more ambitious shows too. It allows us to do big kind of like whether it is a musical like a Disclosure the Musical or a superhero themed episode or a song every other episode. It allows you to spend pencil mileage on stuff that's actually going to end up in the show.
Well, let's talk a little bit about music, because like on the one hand, that had to be one of the harder things to do under COVID protocols because of questions of timing and like just that's one of those things where it's less one person in a booth. Although eventually we found ways to sort of do it that way, right?
Yeah. I mean, Mark Rivers writes every original song for the show and is an incredible comic songwriter and really just an important part of the whole team. And he'll make a demo where he does all the voices, and he's pretty good at imitating a lot of different voices. And we live with that, especially during COVID, for as long as we possibly can. And because it's on the tempo of music, we can at least get going while we're figuring out the best way to record everyone. But we recorded everyone individually, even in a big ensemble song. So it would take days or weeks to get a song even recorded before it was even drawn. So it's pretty complex, but Mark is the guy who gives us the roadmap for it all.
Mark Levin there also down the hall from where they're sitting, he built a record booth in their home, which was where a few of the songs were recorded, which was a real lifesaver for us over the past year.
Yeah, and that was really like you had to figure out a protocol because we could do dialogue, but we couldn't do songs, so you needed to have like a different set of.
Our daughter helped us figure it out too, but we made a home record booth because some actors didn't have a good space recording, it was just too echoey, and others didn't really have the technical know-how to be able to do it. So for certain people, we had to make a space that was safe from a COVID standpoint and sounded good. And so we just took a closet, a big little small room actually, and put up padding and put in the right equipment and just made a space for people to come to.
No, I think we've all been improvising. You know,
Yeah.
I built in I have a teleprompter here, right? So that I
Right.
can, like, when I'm lecturing, I can pull up my notes and still like basically make eye contact. And, you know, like, yeah, let's put it, there's a lot more AV hardware distributed into like,
Sure.
like a lot of rooms than there was.
I'm just laughing because, like, you remember Skype? I mean,
Yeah.
like, I remember, like, right before any of this was like, Skype, it's the worst. You can't do anything virtually, Skype. And then it was like suddenly like Zoom, and now like that's all you do. But like in the world of Skype, you could have never imagined doing everything all the time online. It was impossible. I'm sorry, Skype.
Yeah.
Skype is here. We invented Skype.
Channel was not brought to you by Skype.
No. And as long as Microsoft doesn't buy Netflix, you're fine. Right? But just to finish the music discussion, so like, so Mark is doing the originals stuff, but you all licensed some really great things too. We just heard a Yeah Yeah Yeahs track at the end of Biggest Period Ever. It's the Taco Cat song. Do you have fairly carte blanche to like go and get like licensed music as well?
Well, not carte blanche. We have a budget, which we're always trying to, generally adhere to. And some things are just too perfect. So we make a big investment in one area, and then we know, oh, we're going to have to do an original song or an indie song over here to kind of balance it out. Hopefully, and we have a producer on our team named Abe Foreman Greenwald, who has a passion
the same
for
last name as Missy Foreman Greenwald.
Yeah, exactly. Missy Foreman Greenwald. Yeah, exactly. And he really loves and is instrumental in working with the music supervisor team to find great songs. But it is a balance, because we could spend a quarter of the budget on a single song, and we might, if it's good enough, and then we'll do some cheaper or more original stuff to balance it.
I'll also be like driving. Like I remember I was driving and that Carly Simon song Jessie came on, and I hadn't heard it before, and I was like, oh my God, that's got to be like. And so what I'll do is I'll take a picture of my Sirius while I'm driving, and I haven't crashed yet. So that's
I imagine that's a pricier song than like the Taco Cat song, whatever. No, I vividly remember when Conan was like basically burning all the bridges, leaving the Tonight Show, and spending as much money as possible in that last week. And he's like, and this is the original master of the Rolling Stones Satisfaction, and just like slamming through the budget. Anyway, all right, so we talked about music, we've talked about workflow. One other thing I wanted to make sure we talked about, because Netflix is such a global provider of content, you talked about how important these audiences are virtually and the people and that makes sense. But obviously, sexual mores and frank discussions of sexual identity are going to be wildly different in the whatever it is, 160 different territories. Do you have a special way that you try to deal with feedback at that scale, or are you basically thinking like this is an American Western audience, and if it gets into a place where it's not quite working, like we'll hear about it however we need to hear about it?
Well, no, we don't. We think about it globally, actually, a little bit. We think about this, we tell our stories honestly, and we were very specific from our character's point of view and from the stories that we're going to tell. But we know that this is shown on the same day all over the world. And we get some feedback about things that might be more sensitive in other countries, and we realize they are here, or that they even are here. And that impacts us a little bit, not on an active daily basis. It's more feedback after the fact. We'll hear about something and then maybe make an accommodation to that. But for the most part,
that's pretty rare. I mean, it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare. Definitely.
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we experience is just that this time of life and these feelings are so universal that while we are writing about our own childhoods to some extent, they do cross borders and resonate around the world, because everybody goes through these things and everybody has these feelings.
Yeah, I suppose part of what I was thinking through was, you know, the distribution of BoJack in China was a fraught matter that like was not solely responsible for, but certainly contributed to like the problems that Netflix had getting distribution in China. And that was just because they were slackers and depressives and so on. And here you have very frank, you know, like I said, clarifying discussions about sexual identity. I can imagine various state actors around the world going, well, not that, like everything but that, or whatever it might be. We love Bridgerton, that's sexy and okay, but somehow this other might not be.
Well,
That's what I was trying to.
Yeah, no,
we haven't really encountered that, you
No.
know, and I mean, I know that Kelly was personally responsible for that whole BoJack in China thing, right?
Yes, 100%. That's what I'm here to
but-
talk about.
But no, in fact, and I honestly, we're unaware of China, Netflix in China. We actually haven't had any stuff like that. I'm not even sure if they are in China. Actually, you might know
Yeah,
better than
no,
me.
they're not.
But that said, and Netflix and
And you're blaming Kelly for that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's
That's a big market you fucked.
but yeah, for the most part, we haven't hit as many bumps as one might think, you know, and we might yet. But you know, we're letting the truth of the experience of life, of this time of life, lead us, and again, hopefully it resonates in an honest way across the world.
All right, I want to get to some questions that have popped up in the Q&A while we have been talking, because these are the ones from our students and from the public at large, such as they are. And that public at large is actually, you know, well more than 100 right now in the middle of dinner on a Saturday night, which is pretty great. So Charlotte asks a really interesting question, I think, about politics, that up till now, the big mouth world hasn't really dealt much with politics explicitly, although clearly the parental politics influence their parental styles, but also influence how they treat their kids. Do you have any plans to tackle that more directly in the future?
It's hard, you know, it takes us a long time to make a season. So
Yeah.
topical humor is really, really hard. Like there'll be certain jokes that even like, that seem funny now, but like, you know, 6 months later when we watch them in color don't work. So it's hard to be, you can do things like you could do something about kind of political identity, right? Like I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Green, whatever, but you wouldn't, I don't think we could ever really do something that was really about specific things, because we want the world to feel slightly timeless anyway. I think we had one Trump joke the entire time.
I feel like we had one that we pulled because we wrote it before he got elected, when we thought he was just a joke, and then he became real. And
but I remember like but I think we had
Yeah.
one reference to Trump the entire time.
Yeah.
And it was just because it just didn't work within our universe. So it's hard to imagine really delving deeply in a specific way, but I do think as an identifying tribal way, you could do that story.
Though in season 5, not to spoil anything, season 5, we do explore a little bit more about kids advocating and becoming political.
Yes, like
and
but that's
yeah.
I mean, you can become political,
but
you can like,
yeah.
but you can't be too topical. I think
Yeah.
that's more to the
Yeah.
point. We're jealous a little, you know, that South Park, you know, 2 days later on it goes. But that's not our show.
But I think with us, there's also a level of like, I don't think we have an episode that you couldn't in some way be like, oh, well, that's like, there's the politics, I think, of the writers and the creators. I think is
Well, I
really
mean,
just
Jesse
imbued.
is like a complete Hillary head, and like, you know what I mean? So on some level, there's that. Like it seeps in, you know, like there's no doubt about it that Jesse really worked her ass off for Hillary and was really sad when it worked out.
But even it's like what I was even saying more than that is that it's the politics of a show that does speak to children and about what's happening with their bodies and their emotions, but by its nature kind of puts us at a place in the political spectrum, just just the very existence of the show.
Yeah.
So like the Nick Starr character is clearly diagnostic of a certain kind of, hyper successful, deeply empty inside adult. And, it's a warning obviously to young Nick, but it's also like a kind of a sign to all of us, like this is what's going on in these people as far as we can tell, right?
Well, Nick Starr, I mean, and season 4 with Nick was so interesting because really what Nick Starr is Nick's worst nightmare. It's his fear of what he could become. And I think, with all of us, but I think with Nick Kroll especially, it's just what he does is so brave because he's not only writing the show, but he's performing himself. And in a season like season 4, he's really like performing out and laying bare some of his kind of worst fears about himself. And it really is. I think when you watch those scenes with him and Nick Starr and him and like himself in that last episode, I think that the performance is so great because you can feel that he's really going there with himself.
On the other end of seriousness, we're going to get more milk.
Oh, milk is the best. Yeah, we'll figure.
Hope so.
We love milk.
We'll have to figure out a way to get some more milk. Milk was such a fun discovery, and again, milk worked because I think everybody had a milk at their camp or their school.
Are there other character mascots out there that are like, like they may still be minor, but like they're beloved in the writer's room? And like you mentioned Judd.
Yes.
Judd is beloved. Another
Judd is
beloved by the ladies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Much less to that.
Yes.
I feel Lump is beloved because he's
Is
such
Lump
a doofus.
beloved?
Like
I don't know. Is
No.
Lump
Well,
I think he's
Pumpman,
beloved. People like to pitch on him because he's such an idiot.
Yeah.
So he's one.
And it's funny. We
Everybody loves Rick. I think the writers all love
Rick. We tried to kill him actually, and even I think
we didn't like him. We
season
wanted
2,
to
we're
get
like,
rid of him. He was
nobody
so
wants
gross.
it. And then we
And
just
then we were
realized
like,
He really grew
we
on
got
us.
rid of him.
Yes.
We're all like, oh, it's so sad.
we miss him so
We
much.
miss him
Let's
so
bring him
much.
back
Yeah.
from retirement.
And he gets the big concluding like song, right? Like
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the end, we all just work for Rick.
I wanted to see some of that footage of like of how that voice comes out. Like Rick's voice is an amazing thing. I am definitely going to ask my Disclosure of the Movie the Musical question here, which is the VR scenes in that movie. I know that you must have seen them because you did this. And like was the decision just to like not do that on like the high school stage because no one would believe that the sexual harassment movie had the VR in it? Or
Tried to have at some point there was a VR sequence, but it was very, as you can imagine, it was very confusing.
Yes.
And for those, and Kelly still has not seen. And
I have not.
Okay, guys, out
Oh,
there,
wow.
he still won't watch it.
I was supposed to not watch it since I hadn't seen it. So I could be like the person who said if anything makes sense, and now I'm not watching it.
Well, the VR definitely
I mean,
got
the
it.
episode of Big Mouth was better without the VR scene.
Yes.
The movie Disclosure would have been better without it.
I don't know, that weird lady walking, that flat lady walking forward. I don't know. It was wild.
I would argue that the VR scenes from Disclosure are better than the movie Disclosure, and like you can go find them just like anthologized on YouTube. Let me get one more question here from the audience. Oh, well,
we could do a whole panel about the VR scenes in Disclosure some other time because I will participate, and Jason Mantzoukas will too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I think he's talked about it on How Did This Get Made, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask a question about staffing up and how the writer's room evolves. And there are a number of audience questions that sort of come at this in different ways, and that is, what's the sort of like proactive outreach part of it as opposed to the like, drawing out the experiences of the people who are there? How do you balance like, oh, we're going to have, a trans character who's going to be really important. We should make sure that whatever, Patty Harrison's in our writer's room because like she's fantastic at this. Or is it going the other, like, how does the two-track work, I guess?
I mean, they both are, they're simultaneous in a way, but we know that we need to have a lot of representation, a lot of different perspectives at the table. So, and we know that we couldn't write a transgender character authentically without making sure that we had trans writers at the table. And Patty was instrumental in helping us figure out Natalie. But in general, you know, we're always looking for ways to make sure, and there are a lot more points of view than there are seats at the table, which is unfortunate. And we actually do have a revolving group of kind of part-time writers who even widen our table. So we maybe have 8 regular full-time writers, and then in the other 4 seats at the table, a different group of maybe another 8 people will cycle into those seats to make sure that we're getting as many points of view as we can. And every year we're just trying to, you know, widen our talent pool.
Which goes along with the kind of your first question about like why it was so hard to say what did we get right as opposed to what did we learn, because there's the amount of what we learn is so much wider than what we knew going in.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with bringing in different writers and doing research and bringing in different consultants to teach us what we haven't lived yet.
And talking to high school kids, you know, we almost always talk at the beginning of a season with, we have a very nice relationship with the urban school up in San Francisco, and we often talk with their kids about kind of things that are happening. We've gotten a lot of ideas, and also they kind of tell us, you know, what, oh, this didn't seem right, you know, but mostly they tell us, you know, I'd like to see more of this.
Well, you just hear about things.
Yeah.
Kelly wrote an episode in season 3 called Rankings, I think it was called, and it was about the kids ranking each other, and that was inspired. That came from the kids that were telling us about what's happening in their world.
And it was also like they were talking about it, and Nick and I realized that we had done something like that when we were kids, and all the girls in our grade got really mad at us. And it was like I'm saying, it's that universal thing that it kind of everybody goes through at this time of life, and it kind of repeats itself.
Cool. Well, Kelly, we want to make sure we have you back when Human Resources finally drops.
I'd love it.
We will definitely want to do that. Up next here at 7 o'clock will be our visit with the folks from What We Do in the Shadows, who are all in Toronto right now. So do you have any mean things you want us to convey to them when they arrive? Or?
I mean, a couple of those cast
Unfortunately,
members,
no.
I mean, we love that.
That.
We love that show, and a couple of cast members from that show will be coming up in Big Mouth at some point.
And Big Mouth and in Human Resources.
And in Human Resources.
Yeah.
Trying to get
I can't wait for you to see Human Resources.
Yeah.
It's really great.
We're very excited for it.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to wrap us up here right on time. This has been terrific. And we're all looking forward to season 5 if we have caught all the way up, and those who haven't, I'm sure we'll power through season 4 after this. So thanks so much.
Great.
Thanks so
JD.
much, guys.
Thanks everybody. Thank you for having us, USC.
Bye. Bye.